Good evening and welcome to this episode of In Harmony with Nature. I'm your host this evening, Mike Shacklock. This evening we're going to be talking about rare plants in Nova Scotia, and with me as the guest this evening is Alex Wilson. He's the curator of botany at the Nova Scotia Museum. Welcome to the program this evening, Alex.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, we're going to be talking about rare plants. Now, the word rare means different things to different people and perhaps means different things in the plant world as well. So could you let us know exactly what the word rare means under this, in this context?
Well, you're quite right. It can mean different things. The concept of rarity is something that is infrequent. That's a given. But in the case of a plant, it could be a species which is always to be found in small numbers. It might be found in several different localities, but usually only 1, 2, 3 plants in a stand. The other option would be that the plant is to be located in only a few spots. It might be quite abundant in one specific spot, but that might be the only place that that particular plant is found in Halifax County, the province of Nova Scotia, the entire country, or in fact that might be the only spot where that plant grows in the whole world.
I see. So the people might think that it's not rare to them. They may have grown up with a particular type of plant and it's not really rare to them. It's not.
That's absolutely true. And in fact, the other can be the case. A plant which in a particular locale is only to be found, down by the old mill stream or something like that, the locals will tell you, oh, that's a rare plant. But in fact, if you go 50 miles down the road, that's a very abundant plant, and in fact can be found throughout the province in its own unique habitat, perhaps. But to those people in that first locality, that's a rare plant. So the whole concept requires a certain amount of perspective. You have to really look at the entire range of the plant just to see how it's behaving.
Okay, very good. Well, you've brought along a number of slides and to support the program, so perhaps you could lead us into the slides now.
Well, indeed. The first photograph that I've brought is not a Nova Scotian plant at all. In fact, this cycad is growing in a pot at the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew in England, and it has the distinction of probably being the world's rarest plant. It's quite a story connected with it. In 1895, a male plant with just 4 stems was found growing in South Africa, and this is one of the shoots that was collected at that time and brought back to London. One of the main stems was damaged by Bantu tribesmen, and in 1907 2 other stems were transplanted to the Durban Botanical Garden in South Africa. And in fact another stem was moved to safety, whatever that means, in 1917. In the late 1970s, one of these plants was stolen from the Botanical Garden in South Africa and sold to a private collector for $65,000, making it not only the rarest plant in the world, but probably the most expensive pot plant in the world, too.
I heard of that sort of thing going along with art, but wouldn't have thought it'd be the case with plants.
No, indeed not. But that is an extreme case. Our Nova Scotian plants are perhaps a little more pedestrian. But we do have a few that fall into the category of being endemic. An endemic plant is one that is restricted to a very small range. If you look over at the photographs again, you'll find the only plant in Nova Scotia, well, taxonomists don't completely agree, but possibly the only plant in Nova Scotia, which is completely unique to this province. This little goldenrod, which grows on lake shores down in the southwestern part of the province, does not grow anywhere else in the world. So that's endemic. But It grows on a lot of lake shores down in the Yarmouth, Shelburne area. So even though it's a unique plant, and it is endemic to Nova Scotia, it doesn't have a very high ranking in the scheme of how rare something is. This next one, though, this is Geum-Peckii. This one is a far more interesting plant in that it only grows on Briar Island and on a mountaintop in New Hampshire. Eastern Mountain Evans is its common name. A lot of these rare plants don't have common names. Please don't think that I'm being also terribly pretentious when I use their Latin names, but if something's rare, then the common folk who give it the common name, they don't have the opportunity to come up with that common name. And that's why we have difficulty coming up with familiar names. This fellow has a basal rosette of leaves, and I have a picture of the blossom, a pretty yellow blossom here. Looks a bit like a buttercup.
I was going to say, that would be my common name for
Yes.
it, buttercup.
But geums are common garden plants. A lot of people cultivate geums, and so the genus will be familiar to many of your viewers. The species, perhaps not. There is one other endemic in Nova Scotia. Well, it's something we share with Newfoundland in this case, and it's a little sedge called Carex viridula, and it's so obscure I don't have a photograph of it. Actually, that's not such a surprise. There are lots of rare plants that I don't have photographs of. Now, there are taxonomic problems. Different experts don't necessarily agree when something is a species and when something is a subspecies or a variety. So we have one other plant, and the photograph of it is here. This is called Gerardia neoscotica, neoscotica being Latin for Nova Scotia. And according to some authors, this is endemic because it doesn't grow anywhere else but in Nova Scotia. Unfortunately, other perhaps more prestigious authors consider this only a variety of another species of Gerardia. So, you know, you have to split hairs on some of these things. But this is a specialist topic, and we want to talk about the generalities of rare plants. I've got a map here, and this map is our natural history map of Nova Scotia that the museum produced a few years back. It's got a tremendous amount of information on it, and I'm sure your viewers would have enormous difficulty in deciphering very much of anything. But what is important is that there are certain concentrations of rare plants in Nova Scotia. One concentration is found down in the Yarmouth area and points leading towards Halifax from the Yarmouth area. And those are plants that are associated with the coastal plain, a vast area of wetland that was exposed during the last glaciation 15,000 years ago. Presumably plants that lived in New England and points south colonized this exposed coastal plain, and when the glaciers melted and retreated from Nova Scotia, the coastal plain was inundated with water. We now know that area as the fishing banks, but the plants made it back to dry land, and some of them made it back to southwestern Nova Scotia. So that's one group of our rare plants. The second major group of rare plants is to be found along the cliffs of the Bay of Fundy and in the highlands of northern Cape Breton. And those are the Arctic alpines. Those are northerners who have reached the southernmost tip of their range in Nova Scotia. So our province plays host to southerners and to northerners, and they kind of overlap here. These cliff faces, here's a photograph showing the very end of Cape Split in the Bay of Fundy in the Minas Basin. And the cliff on the right is the home of a number of these Arctic species. The reason they live on the cliff is because the rigors of this maritime situation are rather similar to being in the Arctic. They're exposed to wind, drying winds, salt spray, and let's face it, there isn't too much competition because there are a very limited number of plants that can survive in such a harsh environment. Here is an Arctic alpine species. This particular one is, again, a taxonomic nightmare. It's Minuatia grunlandica is probably the most accepted name now. But it's the sort of thing that you'd find if you went north, you went into the tundra, and you were there in the brief midsummer season when it springs into bloom. This particular plant is to be found on barren areas around Halifax, so Geezer's Hill and places like that. And at one time it was thought to be a real oddity, but recently we have found more specimens of this along the coast at Peggy's Cove and down around Stonehurst. So this is perhaps not as rare as we once thought. Here's one of the Cape Bretoners. Again, a tiny clump of vegetation with flowers that seem extraordinarily large for the plant. The plant is only an inch or two tall. The flower itself is probably another inch tall. This is Diapensia laponica, and it's to be found in some of the highland and upland areas in the Cape Breton Highlands Park. A lot of your viewers might think they recognize this as the common blueberry, and they're half right. It is a blueberry, but it's not the common one that they are likely to pick for their blueberry puddings and cakes and such. This is an Arctic blueberry, and it grows in a number of these habitats that I just mentioned throughout the province. This is the most southerly one we've ever found on Briar Island. It has a sort of glaucous, bluish look to the leaves. The fruit, I don't know whether I could tell them from a conventional blueberry. Now, this is a full-grown, probably very ancient birch tree, Betula michoi. This gentleman is actually on his knees. There's the plant, and it's an Arctic birch. It grows on Briar Island and in a couple of coastal localities throughout the province.
Is that its normal size?
Yes, yes. A whole clump wouldn't be any bigger than the coffee table sitting in front of us, and could be 150 years old. Now, this is an interesting little plant. It's a butterwort, and it's one of those plants that supplement its nutritional requirements by digesting unwary insects. It has sticky leaves, but the butterwort is a northerner, again, that makes it into the very cold and frigid or windy and barren areas of Cape Breton. There's its leaves. Now, this is a very interesting plant. Some years it's fairly abundant, and other years you can hardly find any specimens of it. It's a sunflower type of plant. It grows 3-4 foot tall. Synecio pseudoanica, or beach synecio. One of the places that it grows is the famous nude beach out by Crystal Crescent. I used to take people out to see it in the fall, but the museum has discontinued those walks, not wanting to sully its reputation. But another place you can find it in abundance some years is Three Fathom Harbor. Other years you can't find a single plant. It's curious. There's some factor that determines its germination, I assume, early in the season. And here's a little northern fern. Only grows in the Dingwall area, that is the gypsum area, in northern Cape Breton. It's a holly fern, but not the abundant one that you find in the woodlands throughout the province. Polystricum lonchicus. This little plant is quite common in Europe, but in Nova Scotia, very, very small numbers of specimens. And this is this year's find. The illustration on the screen now is a woodcut from Gerard's Herbal, written back in the 1500s. The reason I show it is that the moonwort, Botricium lunularia, is a plant that has a great deal of history associated with it. It's as it's included in a herbal, that suggests that it has some medicinal properties. It's also the subject of a great deal of folklore. If you collected the seeds of a fern like this, they were said to endow the collector with the property of invisibility, which is very useful in certain trades, I'm sure. Well, this is again a northerner, and we thought it to be extremely rare in Nova Scotia because prior to this summer we had one report from Conrad's Island near Dartmouth and a couple of reports from Cape Breton. But this past summer, this gentleman drew to my attention that if you went to the beach in May, then you could find it. But very few people go to the beach in May. Consequently, the thousands of plants which vanish come June or early July when the beach crowd turns out in numbers, it's never noticed. So it's very abundant at Conrad's Island. Now, those are northerners, and they're at the very southern tip of their range in Nova Scotia. What about the southerners I spoke about earlier? Well, here is a shoreline, a lake in the Tusket River system in Yarmouth, and the plants in the foreground there are Plymouth gentians. Now, I've got a painting of Plymouth gentian, and possibly, before we go back to that last slide, we can look at this. This is one of the ways that the museum collects and documents rare plants in the province. Up until very recently, we had an artist on staff, and we are trying to assemble a collection of fine paintings and drawings of the rare plants of Nova Scotia, and this is the Plymouth gentian.
It's very nice.
Now, the Plymouth gentian grows on several lake shores in the Tusket River system, but nowhere else in Canada. It grows through New England and down to, I don't know whether it reaches as far south as Florida, but that's the only place along the Tusket River that it grows in Canada. Now, people who have cottages in the Tusket River system are being acquainted with this plant through various mechanisms, but it's a slow process. Now, you wouldn't think if you had a cottage that you'd be doing the slightest bit of harm by raking the beach, would you? As this photograph shows. Mm-hmm. Very common thing to do. Build a wharf, throw out a few rocks, rake your beach, good place for the kids to swim. Yes. But in fact, that very action destroys the habitat for this particular plant and a couple of others. So we are attempting to show the people who have cottages along the Tusket River system what this plant looks like. We have a postcard, which is one of our popular postcards at the museum, showing the Plymouth gentian. And we have also established one of the province's special places on the Tusket River system, a place called Wilson's Lake, no relation. And there are illustrations of some of the rare plants, including the Plymouth gentian, in this little brochure. So these are ways we have of making the public aware of the resources that they might have on their beach or their doorstep in this case. There are other plants growing on that very same, in that same reserve and along that same shoreline system. This is a little pink coreopsis, and it too is restricted to the Tusquet River system in Nova Scotia, in Canada. Only place it grows. Same distribution as the Plymouth gentian. A third plant that we're protecting in the Tusquet River Reserve is water pennywort. And water pennywort has little round, geranium-like leaves, tiny blossoms, no bigger than your thumbnail. And it grows in Kejimkujee National Park and at one lake in the Tusquet River system, and again, nowhere else in Canada. Oops, going backwards. Another of the coastal plain species is this netted chain fern. Again, it's a very attractive fern, limited to southwestern Nova Scotia and growing always along rivers. These plants seem to like the type of habitat afforded by high water in the winter, and then the water goes down, they grow in that exposed shoreline. If we were to modify this normal cadence of things and keep the water level low or high, we would wipe out the plant, because it depends on this up-down to eliminate competition. That's the only way many of these fragile species can survive. Here's a little orchid, Habenaria or Platanthera flava. And again, it grows along these same lake shores in Yarmouth area. Very showy plant, Rexia virginica. If you had this on your lakeshore, you would certainly know you had something, because it's a little larger and a little more colorful than some of the others.
It's a very strange appearance to it.
It is indeed.
Very striking.
Oh, there's the orchid again, Habenaria flava. And here's a shrub that grows in the southwestern part of the province around a couple of lakes. It's called buttonbush, perfectly spherical balls of blossom. And again, presumably a plant that arrived here following the ice age, the retreat of the ice, and it's just hanging on by the skin of its teeth. It doesn't spread. Vagaries of climate or its habitat specificity keep it in that particular area. Goldcrest, another similar lakeshore plant. Not a very pretty plant. No great threat from picking anyway. And another shrub, sweet pepper bush. Now, people cultivate sweet pepper bush. It's a valuable garden subject because it flowers in the autumn. But there are native sweet pepper bushes in Nova Scotia, and they were just discovered quite recently, really. The bush is not very distinctive unless it's in flower. And the botanists all go back to university in the fall, so they missed it. Another shrub that grows in the Shubenacadie, Milford area is called leatherwood. And it's a southerner, and for some odd reason there's a small pocket of them hanging on in that part of the province. As the name would imply, you can take the stems and bend them right around, tie them in a knot, and they don't break, they just bend, just leather. Oh, and here's another southerner that's not seen by very many people. This is the skunk cabbage, and it blooms very early. Just as soon as the ice in the swamps melts in the Digby, Yarmouth area, up comes this skunk cabbage. People might notice the leaves later on, but the flowers rarely seen. And here is a plant that's really attracted quite a bit of attention lately. This is the threadleaf sundew, bog dweller. We've only found it in 4 localities in the Barrington area. And I brought along a specimen of this plant. Here it is on the table.
Perhaps we could tilt this right up this way so the lights don't
show me
get right
the
up
right
there.
way to hold it there.
Okay.
Okay, now this plant has attracted attention. It's another one of these insectivorous plants, but there is a proposal to extract peat for fuel from a bog called Swains Road Bog. And unfortunately, this plant is growing in the same bog that the developer wishes to use for peat production. And to the best of our knowledge, the technique of extracting the peat would alter the habitat for this plant, and it would probably die out. So at the present time, there's a hold on that project because of this rare plant. And that's a very unusual thing, that a plant of no commercial value, really, that we know of anyway, would block a development. But it becomes a very complex issue of how much is a plant worth. And this is the some would say the champion, and others would say the culprit. These are plants that inhabit hardwood forests, and they're southerners, because this is the typical forest of points south. Bloodroot is not a rare plant, but we use it as an indicator plant. It grows in rich alluvial soils, along rivers, in woodlands. And when we find bloodroot, we might find other things like this little hepatica, or the onion, the wild leek. This grows very early in the season, very early in the season. There's the flower after the leaves have died down. And here is a very spectacular plant, the Canada lily. Canada lily is huge. It's one of those plants that is scattered here and there, but always in small numbers. And it's much sought after by the gardeners. Anemones. There are lots of these little southerners that creep into our hardwood forests. However, we could go on and on.
That was a jam slide. You do have a few more slides to go through?
There's lots more slides.
Lots more.
Depending on how many you want to use.
Okay, well, we have about another minute to go in the program. Perhaps at this point then, is there any point that you would like to underline at this point before we close?
Yes, I think so. In Nova Scotia, we have 222 plants that are considered to be rare. Of those, a small number are significant because they're threatened or they're endangered. These are designations given to specific plants after a complex evaluation by the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. These plants that have been so designated really do need special protection. Not all 222, just the 6 or 8 plants that have so far been designated. Others will be evaluated as time goes by.
Okay. I think then that we in Nova Scotia have to get to know these plants to make sure that we're not interfering with their great struggle to survive. And if anyone out there is interested in getting more information about the sorts of things that we've talked about tonight, or actually Alex has talked about because he's done a lot of the talking, you can contact the Nova Scotia Museum. And that just about brings us to the end of it. Thank you very much for being with us, Alex.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we've been talking about rare plants in Nova Scotia. My guest has been Alex Wilson. He's a curator with the curator of botany, at the Nova Scotia Museum. And that's the end of this episode of In Harmony with Nature. Thanks for joining us. Good night.